All right, so for this video, we are going to rate Pam Grier and we are going to see what her facial rating is. Honestly, when I first saw her, I thought she was Hispanic at first, but now looking at it, she's actually African American, but it's a little twist to it. Obviously, she's an actor prominently in the 80s, and yeah, so we're gonna see where she will be ranked at. Now, before I start, if you want to get your face rated, make sure to hit me up. My username is going to be down in the description, or I can put a link down in the description, and just give me about 3 days and you should be able to see what your rating is from there. And also I have my link to my list of celebrities that I have already rated. So if you want to see that as well, the link will also be down in the description so y'all can see the other celebrities that I've rated for the man section and also for the female section. All right, so her overall facial rating is a 7.2. How rare is that? That is 1 in 210 people. The percentage of people is the top 0.5%. Now, let me say this one more time. Do not look at the rating, look at the percentage. Most people get stuck on the rating. I want y'all to look more closely at the percentage, because the percentage, it gives you the the it gives you what they really are rather than the rating. Anybody can be rated an 8 or a 9, but the percentage tells you everything that you need to know. All right, so for their side facial score is a 53%. Her frontal facial score is a 72%. Her total facial harmony is a 64%. Her facial dimorphism is a 6.75. Her body fat factors is a 9, and her miscellaneous features is a 7. I will explain why that is a 7. Now the tier list is to the right side. Tier 1 is ideal. Tier 2 is ideal. Tier 3 is normal. Tier 4 is a slight flaw. Tier 5 is a flaw. Tier 6 is a huge flaw. Tier 7 breaks harmony. All right, so her overall facial assessment breakdown, we're going to start off from the worst features. So she does have a rounded mandible, which I'll explain later. Her nasal tip is asymmetrical. It shifts or drifts to the right side of her face. Her her nose, or her unpronounced brow ridge, I guess you can say, and her rounded nasal tip. Now, that's what I was about to talk about. Her nasal tip is a little bit rounded towards the tip. I will talk about that later, and I will show you guys an example of it too. And her brow ridge also doesn't project as far. It might seem like it projects far looking at it from the front, but from the side view profile, you can clearly see why that isn't. She does have a narrow skull shape from the side view profile, and she does have a unprojected nose due to the nasal bridge being very high set. And I will show an example of that as well. Now, the best features is prominent cheekbones, perfect lip protrusion, lower set eyebrows, lengthy nose, and when I talk about length, I mean in terms of height. Her low body fat, so she is lower in body fat, and I'm talking about the younger version of her, not the older version that y'all see now. And her long ramus, and she also does have a great skin texture. Now, these are the rarity scores of other celebrities. I have not yet updated any of these yet because I don't need to, but I'm just putting the most famous celebrities that I have personally rated. Not every celebrity that I've rated is famous, but usually, typically, the most famous ones, I'm just going to place over here so I can have a good idea of where y'all might be at. Now, her facial dimorphism, gave a check for the canthal tilt, gave half of it for the eye aspect ratio, is very close. Gave one for the eyebrow settiness, low set eyebrows, dominant middle third, high cheekbones, high cheekbones, but it was not too high to where I can give full points, but it's very close. Her mouth to nose, gave a check for that. Total facial height to width, gave half a check for that. She does have a smaller shaped head. I'll explain that later. Her eyebrow tilt, gave a check, and lower to upper lip ratio, gave a check for that. Her body fat factors is really good. She has a leaned out face. And then for the miscellaneous features, I will explain after this. So her sclerotia, she does have a little bit of white underneath the eyes. She does have asymmetry with the nose or the nasal tip that I said again. It drifts to the right. And she does have a curved jaw. So I'm going to explain that just right now, that she has a somewhat of a curved jaw and is actually noticeable from the side as well. All right, so if I draw a straight line going straight over here, and then a straight line going straight over here. I know this is not the straightest, but what you will see is her jaw is actually kind of curved a little bit from the front and is kind of somewhat undefined to where it's not really too sharp. And I'm going to also show it with the jaw frontal angle, but the jaw frontal angle will give it more of a an effect to where it will kind of give us an idea of what I'm talking about. But her jaw is actually more rounded and is also more um pronounced in the side view profile as well. But her jaw could be even more sharper. And then she also has a little bit of sclerotia down here. I don't know if I can see that. And then her eyebrows is a little bit thinned out, but I didn't take any points from that because I looked at her other pictures and her eyebrows are not actually thin at all. And then her nasal tip. So the nose drifts to the right, going this way. And I know it's kind of hard to see with this picture because this is kind of like a straight on picture, but if you look very closely, the nose shifts to the right. But I didn't take too much points away from this or anything like that, but that is something that I have noticed when looking at the miscellaneous features. Now, I'm also going to show you guys an example from the side view profile as well, but I'm going to do that later on in the video. Now, the eye separation ratio is a tier 2 at 48.1. So her eyes are a little bit far apart, but it's not too far apart to where she loses a whole bunch of points. This is not really bad at all. This is just slightly a little bit spread it apart. But anything more than this will get you at a tier 3, but it's not bad at all. This is just a slight deviation from the average. And yeah. The next one is the facial thirds. The facial thirds are evenly divided. And another good thing is that her middle third is the most dominant third, which makes her face more feminizing, which is a great thing. So if you are a female, you want your middle third to be the largest third out of all the thirds. And another thing that I do want to explain too, because I know some people are asking, this 6% or any time you see a percent up here, that is pretty much how much percentage it has for the harmony score. So this is 6% of the overall harmony score. So that's why the facial thirds and the eye separation ratio, those type of measurements actually is worth a lot more than other measurements like the ipsilateral alier angle or any sorts of measurements of that nature. So some measurements weigh more than others. All right, so the canthal tilts. So the canthal tilts is a tier 1 at 9.5 degrees. So she does have a very upturned eyes. It makes it look youthful. And obviously she was very young when she took this picture. So that is part of the reason why her canthal tilt is so high. And also typically ethnic, especially ethnic women have more of a higher canthal tilt than Caucasian women. I believe Caucasian women are in the average of like 7 degrees, while ethnic women, doesn't matter the race, is going to be around, it can be up to 9 or even 10 degrees on average. So that's why I'm going to separate this from the typical measurements to the ethnic measurements once I get to a certain amount of faces that I have rated. So I will do that later on this year. But for now, I'm just going to keep it with this, and I will make those slight adjustments when it needs to be made. The eyebrow tilts. And as y'all guys can see, 1.2%, just letting y'all know for some of the subscribers. So it's not worth that much in terms of how much it is for the harmony score. So measurements like this does play a role, but it doesn't play that big of a role. So it's not a huge determination on whether you're going to be attractive or not. It does play a factor, but not a major factor. Now hers is at tier 1, which is going to be at 17 degrees. And yes, she does have a very upturned eyebrows. And also, even though her eyebrows doesn't look too wide or even too bushy or too thick, you don't need a very bushy or thick eyebrows for a female. You can actually kind of get away with having somewhat of a light eyebrows, not too sparse or anything like that to where it's completely noticeable or anything like that, or anything that's kind of like not there or shaved off like Doja Cat has or anything like that. You want to have noticeable eyebrows, but it doesn't have to be extremely dark or anything like that. It just got to be to a degree to where it's just normal. All right, so her bitemporal widths are at 82%. Now, 82% means that she does have a narrow bitemporal widths. And this is relative to the width of her actual head going to the bizygomatic width. And 82% is at the narrow side. I think anything lower than this will be a tier 2 instead of a tier 1. And usually for I believe Hispanic women and also Indian women too, which she is both actually. She is mixed with a whole bunch of things. They typically have more narrow foreheads than the usual person does. And as y'all guys can see, she also has a narrow forehead. It's just not too narrow enough to where it will be discounted or anything like that. So she does have a perfectly narrow head, but it's not too narrow to where it doesn't look unharmonious. Like I said again, I was going to talk about the length and the width of her head, and her head is only at 1.28, which is a tier 2. So it's at the shorter side, but it's not too short to where it looks like a freaking ball or anything like that. And like I said again, her facial thirds are even. She does have properly spaced out, facial features for the most part. Her front of her face is probably, one of her best, or if not one of her best features, to be honest with you. The front side, not really too many flaws, to be honest with you, besides some of the miscellaneous features. But overall, her head shape is proportioned well. And yeah, so it's not bad. Speaking of the forehead, we're going to move on to the brow ridge inclination. Her brow ridge inclination, or pretty much how inclined her forehead is relative to the Frankfurt plane angle, or the line that's perpendicular to the Frankfurt plane angle, is 19 degrees, and that is going to put her at a tier 1. So anything more than this for a female is going to put you at a tier 2. And like I said, usually females don't have brow ridges that are inclined too far back or anything like that. At that point, it's going to look a little bit too masculinizing, and you don't want that to happen. So that is something that you want to avoid, or typically you don't want to have. But yeah, so this is not really too bad or anything like that. And yeah. All right, so recession relative to the Frankfurt plane angle. So she does not have any jaw recession. And another thing too, I want y'all to see this. I know y'all can barely see it, but I'm going to get to it later. But it slightly passes the nasion right there. It ever so slightly passes the nasion and the gabella. If you notice too, the nasion and the gabella are actually at the same points. And it's also going to affect another measurement. If y'all know what that measurement is, maybe not. But I want y'all to take a look at that. The nasion and the gabella are literally at the same points, and it's literally following this blue line right here. But yeah, she does not have any chin recession. She does actually have somewhat of a chin too, and she also has somewhat of a long mandible for her face, but it's not too long or anything like that. It's perfectly fine. And yeah, we're going to move on to the next measurement. Now, that measurement that I was referring to earlier was the nasal frontal angle. Now, the nasal frontal angle is the best way to determine if you have a brow region. Now, for her, her nasal frontal angle is extremely wide. You see how wide this red is? Those two lines that are coming together, and that blue that just stretched all the way out at 152 degrees. And this is going to be a tier 5. So this is a massive, massive, massive angle right here. I'm trying to remember who. I think it was AOC or Britney Spears that had a really high angle of this nature. But for hers, I think could be even wider than that. So this is probably one of the widest angles that I've measured, especially for a female. Now, I have to give the fact that usually females don't have brow regions that are very prominent. But if she did have a prominent brow region, I promise you she'll probably have a little bit of brow bossing near the forehead or anything like that. But for her, this is just pretty wide of an angle. So this is just astonishing to me. Usually, I don't usually see angles of this nature, especially for people that are deemed attractive. The nasal mental angle. The nasal mental angle is 130. Now, I will say her facial convexity is all great. She does have a really good facial convexity. So the nasal mental angle is in coordination with the facial convexity, but it also takes into account the nose projection with the chin projection, or the lower third in coordination with the mandible and also the chin. So as we saw on the last measurement, she didn't have any jaw recession. And I also said she does have somewhat of a chin. And we're going to see her nose projection too. But also it takes into account for all those three things as well. But she does have a good relationship between her chin and her nose. And also this could also tie into another measurement, which is also the nasal-facial angle. But for this one, she did pass this measurement, and this is within the middle of the distribution. So this will be a tier 1. All right, so the nasal projection. Now, this kind of killed me a little bit because she could have easily passed this nasal projection measurement. Now, y'all see a tier 3. Now, a tier 3 is not a good score at all for the nasal projection. And she doesn't deserve a tier 3, but let me explain to I'm gonna explain to y'all why she got a tier 3 later on. But just look at the width of her nose and just look at the nasal bridge of her nose. So in terms of her skull shape and in terms of the nose mythology, um, she does have a unprojected nose, which I will explain to y'all very soon. And then also the nasal width to height projection is 0.92, which is a tier 1. And she does have somewhat of a lengthy nose. And you also can see that from the front view of her face. And also, it's also illustrated with the ispalateral aliar angle. So her ispalateral aliar angle was at a 91, I believe, which is very within the middle of the distribution. And yeah, so that was also due to her nose being also lengthy in size, or in height, I guess you can say. So yeah, so her nose mythology is good. It's just the projection is not, and I'm gonna show you guys why. All right, so the width of her nose, going from all the way over here, is actually being divided by the nasal bridge of her nose, which is very lengthy. Now, how I can tell if a person nasal bridge is higher set or lower set is determined by the space between the actual eye orbits. I don't look at the eye itself because some people might have eyes that are more pronounced, or they come outside of the actual eye orbit or the socket, I guess you can say. And I don't look at the actual eye. I look at just the actual orbit of the eye. So the bone right here. And this distance is a whole lot of distance right here. So going from the nasion down to the orbit, that's a massive gap. So that's how I can tell if somebody's nasal bridge is extremely high set. And for hers is high set. But if she had a lower set nasal bridge, so the width of her nose is being divided by something like this, this is not that much length. So if I divide this by this line, you are going to get a higher number, which might be closer to a tier 1. Now, another reason why I can tell her jaw is curved, if you look very carefully, this is the ramus and this is the mandible. But if you look very closely, and I actually thought that this right here was loose skin. This is not actually loose skin, believe it or not. This is actually her mandible. So I want you to look very closely at what I'm drawing. That's actually the mandible. And if I take that line away and if I put it back, you can clearly see that the mandible is rounded. And I also saw it in a couple of her other pictures too. And yeah, so she does have a somewhat of a rounded mandible in terms of jaw mythology. So I literally thought this was loose skin, but it's just her mandible being curved. So it just makes it less angular and less defined from the front view as well too. So hopefully y'all enjoyed watching what I had to display, and just make sure to like the video, comment down what y'all want to see next, and also tell me any other celebrities that I should do. And yeah, peace.